Hey guys, it's Mike from FieldCraft Survival. Today we are talking trigger control in the FieldCraft headquarters. Hey, I get asked a lot about trigger control. It's actually something that me and Kurt routinely teach, but it's hard to understand. It's hard to break down trigger control if you don't have the time and you don't have the illustration of demonstrating it visually. So there's a whole bunch of information on trigger control. I'm gonna break it down today and make it really easy for you guys. All right, so hey, the first thing is, when you're working with a pistol, safety considerations, obviously, if you have a pistol, you want to do a three-point check on it, make sure it's clear. I like to check the breech, the mag well, and the bolt face, and it's a three-point check, making sure there's no round in the chamber. I also want to ensure that there's nobody around and I'm not pointing the gun at anybody when I'm doing this drill, because this involves a lot of manipulation of the firearm in your hands. What I opt to do today, which you might opt to do yourself, is to use an airsoft gun. This gun is the Black Leopard I made by Alpha. It's a 6mm pellet gun. It's CO2 powered and basically reciprocates the slide upon pulling the trigger. I don't have a CO2 in this magazine today, but I could easily manipulate the trigger here. So, you know, when we talk about trigger control, it means different things to different people. First thing I want to tell you guys is, number one, when you're pulling the trigger, the gun goes boom. So no matter how you pull the trigger, as long as you pull it, a round is going to go outside of the barrel. That seems really simple, layman's term, kind of insulting. But the reason I'm saying that is because in a gunfight, you don't necessarily need trigger manipulation. Well, what's the difference, Mike? The difference is trigger manipulation means I'm manipulating the trigger in reset. All right, before I digress, I want to talk about actually just pulling the trigger. When you pull the trigger on a firearm, you go click, it goes boom, the slide reciprocates, extracting or ejecting a shell casing, an empty round, and then it puts another round in the chamber or another round in battery. All right, when that happens, that's the cycle of operation. So then you let off the trigger, you hear a metallic click because it's resetting, everything's resetting, and you pull it again, boom, it does the same thing. Quickly doing this, it looks like this, boom, 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 and you cycle through the entire magazine, stripping all the rounds off the mag until it's empty. When it's empty, you'll get a slide lock and there's no more rounds in the gun. If you check it, there's no more rounds, it's not there, you could do a slide lock reload. You drop the magazine, you put another magazine in, drop the slide, and you get started all over again. So in gunfighting, what we teach is you don't necessarily need to manipulate the trigger. It's funny because me and Kurt were doing a live feed the other day and somebody said, hey, you know, my instructor, when he teaches me, he says that he doesn't want us to do trigger manipulation because it's too slow. What does that mean? All right, manipulation is a little bit of micro movement in your trigger finger. It actually is used by competitive shooters, especially in slow aim fire. The example is, all right, I have this gun, I'm doing slow aim fire, one shot at a time, very slow. There's no rush, it's not a tactical situation that involves me fighting for my life. Okay, I get on the gun, I slowly press the trigger. Every trigger has slack in the front end of the trigger. That slack is stopped with friction, and it gets to the point to where some people call it the second stage of the trigger. The first stage is that slack you feel, second stage is that flat trigger, and then when you press it, it's gonna go boom. So if I'm doing a competition where accuracy is key, I might slowly press it until all that slack is out, get to the point till it's the second stage, and then I pull it. Boom. It cycles, and then instead of letting off the trigger, I'm going to slowly let off the trigger until you hear a metallic click. That metallic click is the reset of the trigger mechanism, and you hear it, click, right there. And then when you hear it, or when you feel it, that means you could pull the trigger again without going into the trigger well and pulling the slack again. So it makes sense, right? Because if I pull the slack again each time, there's a chance of the gun deviating left and right and maybe potentially off target. So I'm taking all slack out again, pulling the trigger, boom, it cycles, I let off, here for metallic reset, click, and then I pull it again. And I'm not grossly allowing my trigger finger to come off the trigger and then pulling it again. Again, reducing the manipulation of the firearm. Now the debate is, hey, in a gunfight, are you going to do that? Well, what I like to teach, well, me and Kurt like to teach in gunfighting pistol courses as well as pistol courses that we run, it's called writing the reset. And this is the reason I like to use an airsoft gun when doing this, because you actually have to get the muscle memory down. You don't even need to be behind the gun aligned with a pistol to do this drill. You literally need to look at your trigger finger in the gun and you pull the trigger. Click, it goes boom. As it cycles, it's ready for reset. You get the reset, you hear the metallic click, and then you pull the trigger again. What I'm doing is I'm building the muscle memory for my hands, for my ears, and at this point, my eyes to observe what's happening in the cycle of operation. This manipulation can be done quickly if you learn how to do it. All right, so the argument is, can I manipulate the trigger like that and still shoot fast and accurate? Well, let's go out to the range and see if it's possible. Hey guys, I'm on the range and we're talking about trigger manipulation and trigger control. Hey, manipulation is different from trigger control. What I just did is I'm writing the reset, building the muscle memory at a target that's about 15 yards away. As I'm shooting this target, I'm concentrating on slowly pressing the trigger to the rear. Gun goes off, goes boom, it recoils and cycles, and then I ride the reset by letting out the slack, hearing the metallic click, and then press again. So what you should feel is it's almost like you're running a one-stage trigger that doesn't have any friction or any additional movement on the front end of it. So I'll get started and do another set of it. So as I continue to do this drill, I'm going to pick up the pace and go a little bit faster. What I'm doing is building this muscle memory, and when I do this, there's a lot of controversy in the tactical industry where they're saying, hey, there's instructors who tell people, hey, don't worry about manipulation when you're in a self-defense situation. And I'll tell you from experience, you know, it's something that I never even thought about. I thought I was crushing the trigger when I was doing fast iterations of shots, but because I have shot so much, I actually have the muscle memory ingrained shooting fast and writing reset. That should be the end objective. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue to pick up the pace and see if I can push my limits. If I throw at this range one round off a target at this distance with a 6-inch pie plate, then I've maybe pushed it too fast. Then I'll slow back down. But let's see where the limit is. So relatively fast. I don't know what the split time is. It sounds like about 1/4 of a second to me. Ideally, with this Glock 17, a full-size frame, I want to be about 0.20 with a fast split. If I'm doing that reliably, repeatedly, I can move on to the next training scenario, a training event. The whole entire premise of this outline instruction is I want you to get better at manipulating the trigger and shooting faster, manipulating it, not by smashing it. All right, for this one, we're going to do gross manipulation or slapping the trigger. You know, a lot of beginner shooters, when we tell them to shoot fast, this is typically the default that they'll go to. For this, I'm going to show you what that looks like, and then it will be reflected on the target as well, in accuracy, obviously. Hey guys, for this iteration, I'm actually going to do trigger manipulation. I'm going to do it pretty fast to pick up the pace, but I want you to see my trigger finger and see what it's doing. All right, so what I just did is I picked up the pace for trigger manipulation, worked the speed to see how fast I can go. I started riding it. What you'll notice in trigger manipulation, and you can see it in the actual video, when my finger is manipulating the trigger, what you'll see is me managing the recoil. That's one of the most important aspects of trigger control. You can't manage a trigger that's bouncing up and down in unmanaged recoil. So a balance principle is have good grip applied before working the trigger and build up to manipulate it outside of slapping the trigger well. The last thing I'm going to do is demonstrate to you guys what it looks like when you slap a trigger in accuracy with a 5-shot string on an IPSC standard target or a person-sized target versus doing it and manipulating the actual firearm. So I'll do 2 groups, 1 group of 5 slapping it and 1 group of 5 manipulating it. All right, let's go. I'll try to pick up the pace a little bit. All right, so what I demonstrated was repping that drill in a 5-shot shot string, manipulating the trigger. As you can see, I started out slow, started getting the rhythm, and basically almost did a rhythm drill where I'm tracking the front sight, floating behind it is a blurry target. As long as I get that blurry target and I'm tracking the front sight, I could see if it goes beyond the top of the line of sight of the actual target, and that keeps me on target, which, as you can see, was a fairly reasonable accuracy for the speed in which I was shooting. The next thing we're going to do is slapping the trigger or gross manipulation. All right, guys, so for this iteration, I'm going to do slapping the trigger or gross manipulation. What you're going to see, anticipate tracking the movement of my finger slapping the trigger well. I'll do that for a couple iterations of 5-round engagements, and I want you to see what the accuracy translates to. Not too bad, not too hasty, but I did have rounds that are off target. All right, guys, so you saw me grossly manipulating the trigger. What you'll notice about the iterations of grossly manipulating or slapping the trigger versus manipulation is you heard an inconsistent cadence. Remember, when your trigger finger is riding off the trigger and you're not manipulating the reset, you lose consistency. And what happens in that consistency is it translates to rhythm or cadence in your shot sequence. And so you'll get boom, 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 boom. And what happens is in those little bursts or burps in between shots of rhythm that are inconsistent, it will translate to a shot being over the target or a shot off target. So what I want to stress to you is manipulation isn't just about the trigger control. It's a mechanism to keep you in rhythm, in sequence, to make you faster and more accurate. The last point is it's a time issue, right? In a gunfight, you don't have the time. If you're manipulating the trigger control, what you do is optimize the time and the way you operate the gun. So you're basically riding the cycle of operation and the speed in which you can manipulate your trigger finger. If you're slapping the trigger, you're losing time every time it comes off and you slap and engage. So between accuracy and time, the 2 things that you need to stress and you need to optimize in a gunfight for survival, it's obvious to why we do these different things. I can tell you pretty much without hesitation that we've debunked the myth. If you want to get better, you want to get faster and more accurate, you need to learn to ride the reset and understand the practice in order to implement it in your training game. So applying this into your training game, what I want you to do is start with 5-shot sequences. If you start out with a 5-shot sequence and you're riding the reset, your finger needs to learn that muscle memory. It's going to take time. Don't worry about any other practice or implementing of a fundamental. Focus on your trigger control. Manipulate it for 5 shots in rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. As you start to develop, you'll start to get faster. As soon as your trigger finger comes off the trigger, it means you're going too fast and you need to slow it back down. If you start to degrade in accuracy, you need to look at your grip, but also look at the way you're manipulating the trigger. Look, this is going to translate into faster and more accurate shooting overall. I hope it's helped improve your game. Until next time, stay alert, stay alive.